guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 8 of our roll top desk build. I think it's part 8. Well, on last week's show, we closed it all off by getting that top laminated together and routed and sat in place, and it looks fantastic. So I want to start off this week's show by getting our side upper desk panels put together. And I guess we're going to start off by making the panel for the opening in our rail and style of our sides of our upper desk. Well, if you remember in last week's show, we put our rail and style frames of these side panels together and traced out the inner lines. We left 3/16 of an inch at the bottom to give us room for our panel rails, or our panel barrels rather, because if you remember from when we did all of the rail and style joinery for the lower desk, this wood is not going to expand on the long grain, but it will expand on the width or the cross grain. So we need to have those panel barrels in place. So they will be in place at this top edge and at the bottom edge in this case. And all other areas we can leave it without room for expansion. But this is kind of a strange shape here. So any horizontal grain, we're going to want to leave room for those panel barrels. So on the edges here, I'm going to come out from our trace line 3/8 of an inch, as well as from the edge here 3/8 of an inch. But on these long grain areas right here, I'm going to only be 3/16 of an inch up to here. When I get back to the long grain, I'm going to come out past my line at 3/8. As well here at this top line, I'm going to come out 3/16. Once I get it all marked out, leaving all the proper allowances to go into the grooves here for our rail and style, I'm going to cut it out on the scroll saw and table saw for the straight lines, and then I'm going to sand up to the line, and from there we're going to hit the router table and route these panels so that we have that raised panel look on the side pieces of our upper desk. Well, now that I've got the panel routed, we just want to do a test fit just to make sure that everything goes together nicely, just like we have for everything else. A dry fit will really go a long way to correcting or helping you correct problems long before they ever start. So we're going to do a dry fit on this, and once we're happy with the way everything goes together, then we're going to get our panel barrels in place, and we're going to glue this whole panel together and see how it looks. So let me just do the dry fit, and then I'll show you how it looks at that point in time. Well, I'm pretty happy with the fit. The joints look good. Everything's nice and tight at the edges here. There's a little gap at this joint here, but I'm not concerned because I know that once I get the clamps on it, it's going to pull that together. So now that I'm happy with this, I'm going to give all the pieces a sanding, and we're going to glue these panels together. Once the glue is dry, then we can lop off these end pieces that are sticking up here. I mean, those are only put into place in the first place because you're kind of finagling with the whole profile of the thing, and you really don't want to be mucking around trying to get an exact lining up. It's just really difficult. So you're better off to leave that extra on the top and the bottom of this contoured piece, and we can lop it off later. So not a problem. We'll get this glued up, and then our side panels for our tambour, for all intents and purpose, will be complete. Well, while we're waiting for those panels to dry so that we can cut the ends off, we're going to start milling the stock for this section right here. And what that is is the back panel of the upper desktop that those contoured sides will attach to. So just when you thought you were done with rail and style joinery, not so, because we have this entire rear panel to do. Now the entire thing is milled from 1-inch thick stock, with the exception of these panels, which are all at 3/4 of an inch thick. So I'm going to head over to the jointer, then to the bandsaw, then to the thickness planer, etc., 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 and I will mill all the stock that we require for these pieces. And then once we get those milled, then we're going to go through again with the rail and style joinery to join both these stiles and these inner stiles, or in this case the mullions as they're called, to the rails top and bottom, and we'll do a dry fit. We don't really require a video of all of this. Again, we've done it all. We did all this on the lower desk. We did it all in the rail and style demonstration video. It's not too difficult here. I've checked through the dimensions on the plan, and at first glance they seem to be correct. So I will carry on and mill all of this stuff and see you when I come back with hopefully what will be a completed panel ready for dry fit, including these inner panels or these raised panels. So that's going to take a while. So I'll see you guys in, well, I don't know when. Soon. For you, it'll just be a couple seconds. For me, who knows? Well, we're back. We've got the panel glued up. And my suggestion to you is for a panel this size, once again, if you can get a helper, I would. It can be a little awkward. Just make sure that you're checking that each section, each panel is square, and that the overall glue up itself is square. Now, one thing that I forgot is in the top rail, the very top desk surface of the upper desk is held on with those same clips that the lower desktop is held on with, and somebody forgot to cut the kerf for that. But it's no big deal, because I can run this through the table saw, as the contoured side panels actually mount flush on the edge of this panel here, so that kerf is going to be hidden. So I'm going to choose what side I want as the top, and then I'm going to run a saw kerf through that. Once again, it's 3/8 of an inch down from the top of the panel and 3/8 of an inch deep. And there we can see our kerf cut all the way along in the top of our panel, and that is going to house our tabletop clips to hold the top of this desk on the upper desk once it's all in place. We need to give this a good sanding at some point in time, but before we do that, the desktop itself, the upper desktop, is held together in the same process as the lower desktop, and that is with 1/4 inch thick splines. And for that, we need to route that 1/4 inch groove, and we're going to use the same process as what we did on the lower desktop by attaching a temporary fence to our base plate of our router, and with a 1/4 inch straight bit we're going to route a groove in both ends of our back panel, as well as in the inner sides at the back of our side panels. Now, just like we did in the first, make sure that you're routing with your fence running on the same surface as on each piece, so that if there's any discrepancies as far as being centered goes, it's not going to translate to your work if they're both, on the same plane. In other words, you're running your fence along the back edge of your side panels. You have no other choice. So make sure that you're running your fence on the back edge of your back panel. That way you have the exact same distance from the back to your groove, and your splines will line up. I'll also, once again, caution you to run a piece of scrap first. and draw that arrow onto your little makeshift fence so that you know which way to run the router. If you run it the wrong way, you will find that that router bit wants to pull away from the stock, and you'll end up with a line that does this instead of this. So let's route these 1/4 inch spline sections, and then we'll do a dry fit. Well, I've got the dry fit of the upper desk done, and I'm quite pleased with the way the edges are here and the way the whole thing has fit together. And the reason for that is because I routed and kept my fence on the same side of the pieces as I worked. Truth be told, my route or my 1/4 inch groove wasn't exactly centered. It was a bit off. But because I kept my fence on the same side, being the back side of each one of these pieces, it kept that inconsistency the same on all of the pieces, which allowed this edge to line up perfectly. You don't want it to be misaligned, because then you're running into problems. It's a nightmare. Just keep an eye on that and you'll be fine. Now that we've got this all aligned, I want to talk about the spline that's in here. I'm not sure if I mentioned it or not, but the spline is actually 1/2 inch wide by 1/4 inch thick. So that would mean that your groove that you route in each one of the pieces needs to be 1/4 inch deep in order to house your 1/2 inch wide spline, 1/4 inch in each piece. I made mine just a tiny bit deeper just to allow for glue, etc., etc. So now that we've got that done, we need to turn our attention to routing the groove for our tambour. And for that, we're going to have to make a template. Out of all of the processes we've done in the entire build, this one scares the crap out of me more than any of them. And the reason for that is you only get one shot at it. And what we need in this particular instance is a routed groove to go right along this profile, and then it'll curve around, and then it'll curve again and come down the back side of our upper desk sides. As well, there'll be an escape route for our tambour which goes out the top, and that escape route is actually for assembly and disassembly, so it's important that it be there. Now, you don't want to take this to chance with hand routing, so we're going to make a template. So the first thing we're going to start off with is a piece of 3/4 inch MDF, and we're going to start by laying out our profile to make sure that everything is right. We really don't want this messed up in any way, shape, or form. The important part to remember here is that take your time. Take your time making this template, because everything that you do on that template is going to translate to this piece and its mating piece on the opposite side of the desk. And you want that tambour to slide smoothly. Now, if you're following the plans for this desk, this groove is going to be a 1/2 inch wide. However, if you are going with the routed or the router-made tambours, which I'm going to do, this groove is actually going to be 9/16 of an inch to give you that extra play on the wooden tambour. So whichever method you choose, you'll need to decide what thickness of that routed groove you need. So enough talk, let's get that 3/4 inch piece of MDF, and we'll start laying out the pattern or the template for our tambour groove. Well, the first thing that I've done here is taken my 3/4 inch MDF and I have traced out the profile of my upper desk side panels. And I only had to trace one because we know they're identical, because we use that flush trim bit to make them identical. What you need to calculate at this point in time is how large your template is going to be. And it's kind of a hard process to explain, but I'm going to do my best for you. I'm going to be using a 3/4 of an inch outer diameter bushing in my router. Now my router bit is 9/16 of an inch. So you need to calculate the offset of your router. In this case, it will be 3/4, the outer dimension. Subtract the dimension of your router bit, which is 9/16, and that's going to give you 3/16 of an inch. Difference between the two. Well, it's divided by the outer edges of your router bit. Your router bit sits in the middle. So you need to divide that 3/16 in half, which will give you 3/32. That is the offset in my case for the router bit in comparison to the bushing that I'm using. How does that translate to making your pattern for your router? What it means is that for me, my entire pattern has to be 3/32 of an inch smaller than the dimension that I actually need. So it'll be 3/32 on the entire radius all the way around of my tambour track. Now, I can't really explain it much more than that to you because I don't know what type of bushing you're using. I don't know what type of router bit you're using for your tambour. But what I can tell you is that from the outer edge of your radius of your side panels of your upper desk, your edge of your tambour track is going to be 5/8 of an inch in from that. From there, guys, all I can really tell you is follow the pattern or the dimensions on the print, which are a little vague, but you can muddle your way through it to get in 5/8 of an inch minus 3/32 in my case, so it'll come in a little further, and then we'll be able to do that. Sorry, that 5/8 of an inch plus 9/16 plus 3/32. That will be the dimension here. So I know I probably just confused you, but either way, guys, do your best, make the template. If you have any questions, comment below, and of course I'll do my best to answer you, as I always do. Okay, you know, I'm not even remotely happy with that explanation that I just gave you guys. There's probably like 50 of you that have this look. And I think I'm one of them. Let's go back to the bench and let me do this again. So in a nutshell, here is your router base plate. Okay, and there's your router, just like this. And your bit sticks down through the bottom. In the bottom here, you have your bushing. This bushing is 3/4 of an inch in outer diameter. And your bit sticks out through the bottom here, just like this. And this bit is 9/16 in diameter. If you run the edge of this bushing against your template, you have a gap here and here. So the way to figure out that gap, or like I said, the offset, is to take your 3/4, your outer diameter, minus your 9/16, and you will get your entire distance that it is different. And that in this case will be 3/16. But that has to be divided in half because it is divided in half in the bushing. There's half of it on this side and half on this side. So with that, you divide 3/16 in half and you get 3/32 of an inch. And that is how much smaller your template must be in order to route exactly where you want it. So now that I've got that re-explained, let's talk about the template. I have taken our piece of MDF that we traced our profile onto, and I have cut that profile and sanded it up to the line. Now this duplicates our side panel, but that's not what we want. We want the outer edge of that groove for our tambour to be 5/8 of an inch in. But you have to remember that you're going to be routing on the outside of this panel, so the edge of your router bit is actually going to be the inside of the panel. If we just cut this at 5/8 of an inch in, it's not going to do anything for us. So we have to have our 5/8 of an inch in plus the width of our tambour groove, which is 9/16, plus our distance of offset, which we calculated at 3/32 of an inch. So with all of those dimensions added up together, that will give us the size of our template. And once we get that dimension, we're just going to follow it along here, just like we did to make this profile, and that will give us the size template we need to route for our tambour. There is some radiuses that will go up here, and we're going to get to those once we get this main curve here done. So let me do this curve. I'm going to come back and see you after that. I've completed my curve, and you might see here that the line is a little thicker here. The reason for that is I went a little off when I was doing my first marking, but when I was double checking the distances here, it made it so that I could correct it. So now we need to do the top edge of our tambour track, and for that the inside edge is going to be 16 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of our upper desk side panels. But remember, we need 3/32 of an inch less than that because of the offset of our bushing on our router. So that will put it at 16, and I've got it here on my handy dandy calculator. 16 21/32 from the bottom will give us the correct distance across the top here for our routing template. Now we need to do our radiuses here for our tambour to come around these corners. Well, for me, and using the router bit tambours, the minimum radius that I can have for the tambour track itself, I believe it's 3.5 inches. So I'm going to go with a 4-inch radius here on these curves, and we'll just draw them in here just like that, and then one over on this side for the end of the tambour track, just like that. Now you may be noticing here that I am right to the edge here of this, and you may be thinking, well, where is his offset that he has to come back? I've already calculated that in this side when I traced out this side of the tambour. So now that I have this marked out, I'm going to double check things here, and I'm going to cut this out with a jigsaw of all things, sand carefully up to the line, and then this should be it for our routing template. We will find out soon enough once I get this trimmed up and I come back and see ya and we take it for a test spin. And there it is, the routing template for our first stage of routing the tambour grooves. My next step that I want to do here, and I would suggest that you guys do the same, is I'm going to, out of hardboard, just 1/4 inch hardboard is fine, I'm going to cut an exact duplicate of our side panels for the upper desk, and I'm going to place the template onto that cutout, and I'm going to route it as if we were just routing these sides, because I do not want this to get messed up. I really need to know that what I'm routing is being routed correctly, and because of that, we're going to do a test run on hardboard, and I strongly suggest that you guys do the same. As I said, you don't want to mess this up now, because you will have to remake your side panels if you mess it up. So I'm going to run a test pattern, and then we're going to run the actual side panels with the router and our template. Well, I didn't have any 1/4" hardboard. All I had was 1/8, and that's okay. It just means I had to adjust the depth of my router bit so I wasn't cutting through so deeply. So I've done the test cut, and I'll just remove this template here. And we just want to check our measurements to see exactly how we made out. I'm just checking here, and we've got 5/8 of an inch gap here, but see this here? This is way off. So there's something that's just not right there. We've got a 5/8 down gap from here. We have enough here for our panel at the back, which is what we require. So this is fine, this is fine, but this here needs adjustment. So because of that, actually, our whole template is off. So it's a good thing that we checked it with a test run, because if we would have routed this, we would have had some serious problems. I just have to wonder why we have this discrepancy. So I'm going to go and check my measurements, and I'll get back to you. Well, I know where I went wrong, and that's the important part here. And the more important part here is that I didn't route my good side panels. Where the screw up happened was, if you remember, I said that I had already compensated for this side in my template, and that's why it was flush when we marked out the top radiuses. Well, of course, then that whole template got shifted, but in order to compensate for that, I added the extra onto this right side. So as I marked it and came around like this, yes, as I moved the template, it corrected and made this proper, but this got thrown out of whack. It's not that big of a deal. This is why we do test cuts, and this is why from here now I will be making another template and doing another test cut. So you've already seen the process of how to screw it up. Take those same methods and do it with proper measurements and get a template, and then end up routing your panels. And that panel route, of course, is going to be 1/2 inch deep, and in my case 9/16 in diameter. So once I get those routed, I will see you after that. Okay, if that wasn't nerve-wracking enough, we have one more to route, and that would be the exit or the escape area for this tambour. Should you ever need to work on the tambour or need to disassemble it for some reason, you're going to have to get a way to get that tambour out of there, and this escape hatch is kind of the way to go. So I will show you how to route that, and then we'll carry on from there. Well, all I've done for the escape hatch is I've taken the old template that was ruined, or that was incorrect, I should say, and I have used that to make a template here, which is duplicating what we already have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp this down, and once I have it in place the way I want it, and I'm happy with where it's positioned, I'm going to run the router through this section here. And all that's going to do, essentially, is it's going to leave a section right here, and then there's going to be a straight part that'll come out the top that as you lift the tambour, you can actually guide it right out through this top and pull it out through that top if need be. So I'm going to route those sections, and of course I'm going to do a test one on that 1/8 inch MDF section that we used earlier, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the results of that escape route. And there would be our escape hatch where the tambour could come up here, and you could guide it out here at the top of the upper desk if need be, but gravity will hold it down and allow it to flow back in through here and down behind the panel that will go in there afterwards. But route your escape hatch in both of them, and that is it for the routing on these two pieces. So you can put your heart back in your chest and stop worrying about buggering up your side panels. Well, now that we have those side panels routed for the tambour, you can basically put the thing together. But before you do, you're going to want to mill the stock for the top of that upper desk. And for that, it's 1 inch thick stock, the same as what it is for the desktop of the lower desk. And it's going to be 51.5 inches long, same as the lower desk, but it's only 13 3/8 of an inch wide. Now, I don't have a board that's 13 3/8, so I'm going to be laminating it. No big deal. I'm going to mill that 1 inch stock, get that piece laminating up so that we can cut it to its final dimension a little later. But other than that, you can put this upper desk together now. So make sure it's sitting on a nice flat surface, get your splines in place, glue it together, clean up your squeeze out, and make sure that the corners are square. Also, you want to make sure that the front of the desk, where there is no support, is at 48 inches, the same as that back gap or the width of the panel. So square it up, glue it up, clamp it together, mill the top 1 inch thick by 13 3/8 by 51.5, and then once you get all that stuff done, come back and see me. And that would be all the time we have for this week. But a lot of progress done this week with that upper desk and the routing of the tambour tracks and that rear panel. It's the top of it. Let me just step aside here and show you. This is where we're at right now, and we're really in the home stretch. But what you want to think about at this point in time, carrying on into next week's show, is before we get to mount this desktop of the lower desk and screw everything down together, is there any little secret little cubbies you want to put in? I'm going to put some in mine. Obviously, I'm not going to show that on the video, but we're going to put those in, have some fun with it at this point in time. And we're going to be back next week with a little more fun and yet another woodworking video.